Streltsov's aunt lived in a small two-bedroom apartment in the Sokol district, a modest but cozy abode of an officer's widow who had served her country all her life. Igor hadn't been here for almost 6 months. First assignments for the regular KGB, then the transfer to Department 13 and his first missions. His constant busyness and perpetual fatigue had made him a poor nephew, something his aunt, however, never mentioned. Igoresha! Tamara Vasilyevna hugged him tightly as soon as he crossed the threshold. What brings you here? I thought you'd completely forgotten about me. Sorry, Aunt Tamara. He smiled awkwardly, kissing her on the cheek. Duty. Always duty, duty, she sighed, leading him to the kitchen. They've run you ragged. You've gotten so thin. And your eyes, she looked at his face carefully. Your gaze is different, as if you've aged a decade. Igor looked away. His aunt had always been observant. What could he tell her? That he had indeed aged in soul because part of that soul now belonged to a being from another world. Would you like some tea? She asked, not waiting for an answer. Or something to eat. I have borscht, made it yesterday. Tea, he nodded. And borscht too. But first I wanted to ask something. Ask away. She put the kettle on the stove and took a pot from the refrigerator. Remember how you used to tell me about grandfather? Vasily Petrovich? Tamara Vasilyevna froze for a moment, then turned to him. Of course I remember. He's my father, after all. Why? I need to know more specifically. When and where did he fight during the Civil War? You said it was in the Arkhangelsk region, right? His aunt sat down opposite him, looking at her nephew intently. Why this sudden interest in family history? She asked. You weren't particularly concerned with it before. Igor had prepared a cover story in advance. I had to visit those places on duty. I got curious. Maybe I'm following in grandfather's footsteps. She smiled, but disbelief showed in her eyes. After all, she was the daughter of an intelligence officer and the wife of a state security employee. Not so easy to deceive. Almost no documents have survived, she said finally. Just photographs and father's own stories. He didn't like to remember the war, especially the Civil War. He said it was a terrible thing when Russians kill Russians. But where exactly did he fight? In different places, she shrugged. But in early 1919, he was definitely in the Arkhangelsk region, near Kolmogorye. He was captured by the Whites, was supposed to be executed, but somehow miraculously escaped. Streltsov's heart beat faster. How exactly did he escape? Did he tell you? Tamara Vasilyevna frowned, remembering. He said that during the execution, a sudden firefight broke out. Red Army soldiers appeared from somewhere and opened fire on the Whites. In the confusion, he managed to run away. Then he wandered in the forests for a long time, nearly froze to death, but eventually made it back to his own people. Igor swallowed the lump in his throat. It all fit. It was them, him and Vera. They had indeed changed history. And did he mention anything strange about this firefight? Strange? She thought for a moment. I think so. He said those Red Army soldiers were commanded by some young officer who shot with unusual weapons, and that there was a woman in uniform with him, which was rare in those years. Father also mentioned that they suddenly disappeared, as if dissolving into thin air. But you know, she waved her hand, I always thought he was embellishing for the sake of interest. In his old age, he liked to tell all sorts of tall tales. The kettle boiled, and Tamara Vasilyevna got up to make tea. Igor sat, trying to process what he'd heard. So his grandfather remembered them, and spoke of them as some kind of mysterious saviors. Do you have any photographs of him from that period? Streltsov asked when his aunt placed a cup in front of him. Of course, she nodded. In the box, in the cabinet, but they're in poor condition, very old. She went to the living room and soon returned with a worn wooden box. Opening it, his aunt carefully sorted through old photographs until she found the right one. Here, she handed him the photo. This is father in 1920, after that incident. He served in the Red Army, in some special department. Streltsov took the photograph. From the yellowed snapshot, a young man in military uniform looked at him, the same one he had seen in the ravine in 1919. But there was something else about him, some detail that Igor hadn't noticed in other photographs of his grandfather before. Around Vasily Petrovich's neck hung a medallion, similar to the one Streltsov himself wore. "What's that on his neck?" he asked, pointing to the photo. His aunt leaned in, examining it. "I don't know exactly. Some kind of military talisman. He always wore it, never took it off. Said it was his protective charm." "Where is that medallion now?" "Buried with him," she sighed. "Before his death, Father strictly ordered that this item not be removed from him. He said otherwise his soul would not find peace." Igor looked at the photograph, not believing his eyes. His grandfather had been one of them, an employee of Department 13, or a similar structure that existed in those years. "Aunt Tamara, did grandfather ever talk about his service in more detail? About this special department?" "No," she shook her head. "He always avoided answering. Said he'd signed a non-disclosure agreement for all eternity. Only sometimes, after drinking, would he hint that he fought not only with people, but also with those who weren't human. My brother and I thought he was just telling scary stories to amuse us." She stirred the borscht, ladling it into bowls. "Eat, Igoresha, it's getting cold." They dined in silence. Streltsov tried to process the information he'd received. His grandfather hadn't just survived thanks to their intervention. He had followed in their footsteps, becoming an operative of Department 13, or its equivalent in those years. "Thank you, Aunt Tamara," he said when he finished eating. "Delicious as always." "You're welcome," she smiled. "Visit more often, or at least call." He promised to call and visit, though they both knew that duty would take him away for a long time again. At the door, Tamara Vasilievna suddenly hugged him tighter than usual. "Take care of yourself, Igoresha," she whispered. "I can see you're not telling me everything, that something serious has happened. Just come back whole, all right?" "I promise," he replied, kissing her on the cheek, and he thought that he could not return whole in the literal sense of the word. Parts of his soul already belonged to Merak. Streltsov spent the entire next day preparing for the new assignment. He studied maps of Karelia, familiarized himself with materials about the military unit where the anomaly had occurred, and practiced at the shooting range. In the evening, he called Vera. "Did you find anything about Belov?" he asked when they arranged to meet at the metro entrance. "Some things." Her voice sounded tense. "But not over the phone. Let's meet in an hour." They sat in a small cafe near the Sokol metro station. The place was noisy. Music played. Patrons talked loudly, laughed. The perfect place for conversations that shouldn't be overheard. "Belov really was one of us," said Vera, stirring her tea. "He served in the department from 1932 to 1937, then retirement due to health reasons. At least, that's what's officially recorded." "And unofficially?" She looked around and lowered her voice. "His partner companion defected, sided with one of the ancients. Belov tried to stop him but couldn't. He was seriously injured, physically and mentally. After that, they removed him and sent him to the backwoods, away from Moscow." "But they left him the medallion?" Streltsov was surprised. "Isn't that a protocol violation?" "A major one," Vera nodded. "But the thing is, his companion, a water spirit named Vlaga, didn't just betray. He merged with Belov's soul so deeply that they couldn't be separated without destroying both. So they left the medallion as an anchor, keeping the remnants of Vlaga in our world. So all this time Belov lived with a traitor inside him?" "Uh-huh, and apparently it drove him mad. Or," she hesitated, "or Vlaga gradually took control." Igor involuntarily touched his medallion. Mrak inside stirred slightly, as if hearing their conversation. "Is that possible? That they take control?" "Theoretically, yes." Vera also touched her medallion. "But only if we allow it. if we voluntarily give up too much of our soul, or if they find a way to take more than we agree to give. They fell silent. Around them, the cafe's ordinary life continued. Waitresses delivered orders, the smells of pastries wafted from the kitchen, patrons chatted carelessly. None of them suspected what the two young people at the corner table were discussing. "Did you see your aunt?" asked Vera, changing the subject. "Did you learn anything about your grandfather?" Streltsov told her about his visit, about the photograph showing the medallion, about his grandfather's stories of strange saviors who appeared during the execution. "So we really did change history," Vera said quietly when he finished. "Your grandfather should have died there in the ravine. Instead, he survived and even became one of the department's operatives." "Is that bad?" "I don't know," she shrugged. "History has a way of self-correcting. Maybe he was supposed to survive anyway, just by different means. Or—" she didn't finish the sentence. "Or what? Or we created a temporal paradox, the consequences of which haven't yet manifested. Who knows, maybe this is what led to the current weakening of the boundaries between worlds." Streltsov frowned. "Are you saying that what's happening now might be my fault?" "Not fault," she placed her hand on his. "Just cause and effect, action and consequence. But this is just a theory, I'm not sure." They paid and went outside. The evening was cold but clear. Stars shone brightly in the dark sky. "Ready for tomorrow's mission?" asked Vera as they walked to the metro. "As much as possible," he nodded, "though Karelian forests in winter aren't the most pleasant place for walks." "This won't be a walk," she smiled slightly. "Military facility, anomalous activity, a disappeared platoon, prepare for a serious situation." "What do you think it resembles, Vilnius or Arkhangelsk?" "Neither," Vera shook her head. "In Vilnius there was a demon who created a portal to limbo, in Arkhangelsk a temporal rift. And here, judging by the reports, we're dealing with something that's seeping through the very fabric of reality. Something alien, foreign." "Doesn't sound very encouraging," Igor remarked. "When is it otherwise in our line of work?" She shrugged. "Anyway, see you tomorrow at the airport. 8 in the morning, don't be late." She unexpectedly kissed him on the cheek and quickly headed to the metro entrance. Streltsov stood watching her leave, feeling a slight warmth where her lips had touched. A strange feeling in his new life, where emotions gradually gave way to emptiness. The An-26 military transport plane flew over the endless Karelian forests. Outside the windows stretched a white blanket, interrupted by dark patches of coniferous forests and icy lake surfaces. A beautiful but harsh region. In the plane, besides them, were 6 other men in civilian clothes, the operational support group assigned by Javan for this mission. They were all from Department 13, had combat experience, but unlike Streltsov and Vera, were not carriers. Their task was to secure the perimeter and evacuate if necessary. "Landing in 10 minutes, the pilot shouted from the cockpit. Vera checked her weapons, a standard PM pistol with silver bullets and a new acquisition of the department, a compact Val submachine gun with a silencer and special ammunition. Streltsov followed her example, checking his own equipment. "Descending," the pilot shouted again. The plane began its descent, and soon they landed on a small military airstrip. When the hatch opened, frosty air rushed into the cabin, -30 at least. On the runway, a UAZ jeep with army plates and an officer in winter uniform with major's epaulets awaited them. "Major Sokolov, battalion commander," he introduced himself when they descended onto the concrete. "You're from Moscow? From the committee?" "Yes," nodded Vera, showing her identification. "Captain Sokolova, Lieutenant Streltsov. The rest are the support group." "Namesakes, then." The major smiled slightly. "Well, welcome to our neck of the woods. Let's go to headquarters. I'll tell you everything there. Your people can stay in the barracks." The support group loaded into an army truck that arrived next, while Vera and Igor got into the UAZ with the major. The drive to the military base took about half an hour. They drove through a snowy forest on a narrow but well-cleared road. Along the way, the major talked about the local conditions, harsh but familiar to those who served here. Our unit is small, he said, an air defense battalion covering an important strategic facility 100 kilometers from here. What exactly? I won't say you understand secrecy. Of course, Vera nodded. Tell us more about the incident instead, about the missing platoon. The major's expression darkened. That's quite a story. Lieutenant Karpov's platoon, 23 men. They were on exercises in Quadrant B-17, about 15 kilometers from here. They were supposed to practice camouflage and survival in winter conditions for 3 days. On the second day, communication was lost. We sent a group to check. No one. No tracks, no equipment, no weapons, as if they'd evaporated. Were there any peculiarities before the disappearance? Asked Streltsov. Unusual radio messages, atypical behavior of personnel? Well, how to put it, the major hesitated. The day before they vanished, Karpov reported strange lights in the forest. Thought maybe poachers or local hunters. So he sent a patrol to check. 4 soldiers, Sergeant Vasiliev Sr. in charge. They returned 3 hours later, all somehow not themselves. In what sense? Vera became alert. Pale, with a vacant stare. They spoke slowly, as if in a dream. Karpov attributed it to fatigue and the cold, but they still reported to the medical unit. The doctor found nothing, just low blood pressure and a slow pulse. Said they needed rest, and the next morning both they and the entire platoon disappeared. And these strange lights? Did anyone else see them? The entire base personnel, the major smiled grimly. They appear every night now, green, blue, sometimes red, moving above the forest between the trees. Radars don't detect them, night vision devices don't either, only visible to the naked eye. And what does command think about this? Asked Vera. Officially, atmospheric phenomenon, something like the Northern Lights, but on a local scale. That's why they called you to check for. How was it put in the directive? He consulted a paper. Possible diversionary reconnaissance activities using experimental means of influencing personnel. But if you want my opinion, he lowered his voice, there's something wrong here, very wrong. They drove onto the base territory. A standard military town, barracks, headquarters, dining hall, a sports ground now covered with snow. Around it, a fence with barbed wire and watchtowers. The major led them to headquarters, a 2-story brick building with a red star above the entrance. His office was warm and smelled of tobacco. Maps of the area, photographs of officers, and formation diagrams hung on the walls. Have a seat, he pointed to chairs by the table. Tea, coffee? Thank you, we won't refuse, Vera nodded. And please show us the area where this happened. The major unfolded a large-scale map of the region, attaching it to the wall. Right here. He pointed to a square marked with red pencil. Quadrant B-17. Solid forest, a small lake, a couple of hunting cabins, a remote place. He went to the safe, opened it, and took out a folder marked Top Secret. These are all the materials on the disappearance. Reports, witness testimonies, patrol schemes. There's something else not included in the official report. The major handed them a thin, unmarked folder. Personal observations, so to speak. Streltsov opened the second folder. Inside were handwritten notes and several photographs taken at night. They vaguely showed strange light formations above the forest, not point sources, but rather foggy patches, changing shape and color. Beautiful but eerie, commented the major, noticing his interest. And each night there are more of them, as if something is awakening. There was a knock on the door, and a young lieutenant entered with a tray bearing cups of steaming tea and cookies. Thank you, Savelyev, the major nodded. This is my deputy, Lieutenant Savelyev Andrei Viktorovich. If I'm not around, you can turn to him. The lieutenant, a slim young man with an intelligent gaze, nodded briefly and left. When can we examine the disappearance site? Asked Vera, reviewing the documents. Right now if you want, the major shrugged. But I'd recommend waiting for morning. Night will fall soon, and in the darkness there, it's not safe. We've seen things scarier than strange lights, Streltsov remarked. I'll grant you that, the major nodded seriously. But it's still risky. Besides, we have a curfew at night. No one leaves the base territory after 22. District commander's orders. All right, Vera agreed after a brief consideration. We'll leave at dawn. In the meantime, show us where we can stay, and we'd like to speak with those who last saw the missing platoon. Rooms have been prepared for you in the officers' dormitory. As for witnesses, the major rubbed his chin. From our unit, only the radio operator, Corporal Zubov, communicated with them. There were no other contacts. They were in the field on exercises. Then we'll talk to him, Streltsov nodded. Is he on duty now? Yes, until 1800 hours. After that, he can be summoned. With that, the conversation concluded. The major himself escorted them to the officers' dormitory, a single-story wooden building with stove heating. Inside it was warm and clean, though quite simple. Iron beds, nightstands, a table, a wardrobe. They were assigned 2 adjacent rooms. Make yourselves at home, said the major at the doorway. Dinner is at 18:30 in the officers' mess. Afterward, if you wish, you can talk to Zubov, and tomorrow at dawn, around 8, we can drive to the incident site. When the major left, Vera entered Streltsov's room. What do you think? She asked, sitting down on a chair. Atmospheric phenomena don't kidnap entire platoons without a trace, Igor said thoughtfully. There's definitely something supernatural here. I agree, she nodded. But what exactly? Looks like a boundary breach, but not like what we've seen before. Something more extensive. She took a small device resembling a Geiger counter from her bag and turned it on. The device hummed quietly. The needle on the dial quivered and slowly moved to the right. The background level of supernatural activity is elevated, Vera stated, looking at the device. And this is right on the base, 15 kilometers from the incident site. I can only imagine what the readings will be there. Are our medallions reacting in any way? Asked Streltsov, automatically touching his. Zarya is restless. Vera touched her medallion. She senses danger. And Mrak? Strangely quiet, Igor admitted. Usually he's more active, especially when he senses an opportunity to receive new payment. That's concerning, she frowned. If supernatural entities fear what's happening here, we should be doubly cautious. Vera put away the device and went to the window. Outside, it was already beginning to get dark. Winter days at these latitudes are short. Above the forest, visible beyond the base's fence, the sky was taking on a strange greenish tint. Look, she said quietly, it's already starting. Streltsov joined her. Above the dark line of trees, a greenish glow was spreading, from which gradually formed writhing bands of light resembling the tentacles of a gigantic creature. Looks like the northern lights, he remarked. Only somehow wrong. That's not the aurora, Vera shook her head. It's something trying to break through into our world, probing for weak spots in the fabric of reality. They observed the strange phenomenon until there was a knock at the door. Lieutenant Saveliev had come to escort them to the dining hall. Dinner in the officers' mess was sparsely attended, only 5 or 6 officers from the base. They all cast curious glances at the newcomers, but asked no questions. Military discipline and vigilance. If the KGB officers had come for an inspection, better to keep quiet. After dinner, the major brought Corporal Zubov to them, a thin young man with nervous movements and anxious eyes. Have a seat, Corporal, Vera offered when they were settled in a room in the headquarters building allocated for their discussion. Tell us about the last radio communication with Lieutenant Karpov. Zubov sat down, nervously clasping his fingers. It was January 20th, at 1945, he began. The usual control communication session. Karpov reported the situation. Personnel were practicing camouflage, preparing positions, organizing the camp. Everything according to the exercise plan. Did he mention the strange lights? Asked Streltsov. Yes, sir, the corporal nodded. He said they were seeing unusual illumination above the forest, similar to the northern lights, but localized. I passed the information to the duty officer, who informed the commander. They decided it was an atmospheric phenomenon posing no danger. And what happened next? At 22:15, Karpov contacted us again, Zubov continued. He spoke strangely, slowly, with pauses. He said the patrol sent for reconnaissance had returned. Sergeant Vasiliev and 3 privates. They had found some kind of object in the forest. Couldn't identify it. According to the description, a metal construction, partially buried in the ground, with, he faltered. With what? Vera prompted him. With hieroglyphics or symbols of unknown origin, Zubov nervously swallowed. The lieutenant said the object emitted light and heat, though there were no visible sources, and also people who touched it began to behave strangely, speaking in an incomprehensible language, staring at one spot. Did he request help? Evacuation? No, ma'am. The corporal shook his head. Karpov decided to post guards and wait until morning. He said he would send a full report with photographs of the object in the morning. That was the last communication session. And the next day? In the morning at 8, he didn't make the scheduled contact. We tried calling them every half hour. No response. At 10, the commander sent a group to check what had happened. They found an empty camp, tents still standing, belongings in place, radios working, but no people. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing, and no metal object that Karpov had mentioned. Streltsov and Vera exchanged glances. The story was becoming increasingly disturbing. What about the weather conditions? Asked Sokolova. Snowfall, blizzard? Clear weather, no precipitation, answered Zubov. Temperature around -20, light wind, typical winter weather for our area. And what happened to the group sent to investigate? Did they notice anything unusual besides the absence of people? They reported one peculiarity. The corporal lowered his voice. Complete absence of sounds. No birds, no wind, no cracking branches. Absolute silence, as if in a vacuum. And they also said they felt the whole time as if someone was watching them from the forest. Although radars and thermal imagers showed no presence of people or large animals. He paused, then added, after that group returned, the strange lights began appearing every night, and each time there are more of them. Thank you, Corporal, Vera nodded. You may go. When Zubov left, Streltsov turned to Vera. An object with incomprehensible symbols, emitting light and heat? Sounds like an artifact of supernatural origin. Yes, she agreed. But why didn't the search group find it? Where did it go? And most importantly, where did an entire platoon disappear to? She opened her bag and took out a small device resembling a pocket radio receiver with headphones. What's that? Asked Igor. A prototype mental scanner, Vera explained. Technical department development. It detects residual thought forms. If people disappeared recently and experienced strong emotions, the device can hear the echo of their thoughts. And this works? Theoretically, she smiled weakly. It hasn't been tested in practice. We'll be the first. Excellent. Streltsov looked skeptically at the device. So tomorrow we're heading to the disappearance site with untested equipment to search for an unknown object and missing people. What could go wrong? Everything, she answered simply. Absolutely everything. That's why I suggest you get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow we'll need all our strength. During the night, Streltsov had a nightmare. He stood in a snow-covered forest surrounded by a greenish glow. Before him was a strange metallic object, resembling a fragment of some gigantic mechanism. On its surface, incomprehensible symbols pulsed, emitting light, and the longer Igor looked at them, the more it seemed they were forming into words, into a message. He reached toward the object, wanted to touch it. And at that moment, figures in military uniforms emerged from the forest, Karpov's platoon. But they were no longer people. Their eyes glowed with the same greenish light as the symbols on the object. They moved strangely, like marionettes on strings, and they spoke not in Russian, not in any earthly language, but in a dialect that made blood freeze in veins. They approached Streltsov, extending their hands, and at that moment he woke up, breathing heavily. The room was dark and cold. The stove had burned out. Through the window a greenish glow was visible, similar to what he had seen in his dream. Igor went to the window. Above the forest spread a whole sea of strange light, forming bizarre patterns and figures, as if someone were drawing unknown symbols in the sky. A knock at the door made him start. "Streltsov, are you awake?" Vera's voice sounded concerned. "I'm awake." He opened the door. "You saw it too?" Yes, she was already fully dressed. "This is no ordinary glow. It's intelligent, forming patterns too complex for a random phenomenon." She entered the room and looked out the window. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. "They feel it too." Streltsov knew who she meant. The medallion on his chest had become cold, almost icy. Merak inside was restlessly moving about, as if trying to hide from something frightening, even to a supernatural being. "Merak is afraid," Igor confirmed. "I've never seen him like this. Zarya too." Vera touched her medallion. "That's a bad sign. If what's happening here frightens even them." She didn't finish the sentence, but Streltsov understood anyway. They had encountered demons, ghosts, temporal rifts, but what awaited them in the snow-covered forest could be much more terrifying. "What time is it?" he asked, beginning to dress. 5 in the morning, Vera replied. "Still 3 hours until dawn, but I won't be able to sleep anymore. I suggest we prepare our equipment and gear, and drink coffee. Lots of coffee." They spent the remaining time until dawn in silent preparation. They checked weapons, distributed special equipment in backpacks, carefully studied the map of the area. The strange glow above the forest continued, though by morning it had become less intense. At 7 o'clock they were joined by the support group, 6 operatives who had been staying in the barracks. They all looked tense but determined, professionals ready to carry out their assignment. "The situation is as follows," said Vera, gathering everyone at headquarters. "We suspect the presence of an anomalous zone of supernatural origin in quadrant B17, probably connected to an unidentified object reported by the missing platoon. The task is to locate this object, study it if possible, and find traces of the missing soldiers." "The group will be divided into 2 teams, Streltsov continued. "First team, myself, Captain Sokolova, and 2 of you. We go directly to the disappearance site. Second team, the remaining 4. You establish a security perimeter and maintain communication with the base. In case of our disappearance or loss of communication for more than 2 hours, immediate report to Colonel Derzhavin via the special channel, code Amber." The operatives nodded. They understood the seriousness of the situation and the danger they might face. At 8 o'clock, as daylight began to appear, they left the base in 2 Army UAZ vehicles. Major Sokolov personally accompanied them, driving the first vehicle. The road was cleared but very narrow, just a single track winding between snow-covered pines. "Usually only our vehicles drive here," the major explained, "and not often at that. Wilderness, in a word." After 40 minutes, they reached a turn onto a country road leading deeper into the forest. "From here, only on skis," said the major, stopping the vehicle. "The road is snowed in, can't drive through." They unloaded their equipment, put on skis, and moved forward. The group stretched out in a line, led by a local guide, a sergeant who knew these places well. The weather was clear, frosty, but windless. Ideal conditions for a ski trip, if not for the purpose of their journey. After 2 hours, they reached the place where the missing platoon's camp had been, a clearing in the forest surrounded by tall pines. The tents were still standing, covered with snow but intact. Around them, a camouflage net had been stretched, concealing the camp from aerial observation. "Everything is exactly as it was," the major said quietly. "No one touched anything. Eerie, isn't it?" Vera took the supernatural activity detector from her backpack. The device immediately responded with a piercing beep. The needle went off the scale. "Readings exceed the norm by tens of times," she said, looking at the scale. There was definitely a breach here. "Support group, establish the perimeter," Streltsov commanded. 2 at the northern point, 2 at the southern. Radio contact every 15 minutes. The operatives nodded and split up, heading to the designated points. "Major, you'd better return to the road," said Vera. "We'll examine the camp and its surroundings." "No way," Sokolov shook his head. "These are my men who disappeared. I'm staying." It was pointless to argue, so they headed toward the tents. Inside, everything looked as if people had just stepped out and would return any moment. Sleeping bags neatly laid out, personal belongings arranged, cups with frozen tea standing on an improvised table made of crates. "Looks like they dissolved into thin air," the major remarked, examining the platoon commander's tent. "No signs of struggle, no hastily abandoned belongings." Streltsov found Lieutenant Karpov's tablet in the corner of the tent. Inside were maps, the exercise plan, and an observation log. The last entry was dated January 20th, 2130. Strange glow intensifying. Sergeant Vasiliev and privates who returned from patrol behaving unusually, sluggish, speaking incoherently, probably hypothermia. We'll send them to the base for medical examination tomorrow. Object found in quadrant G4 defies identification, possibly a satellite fragment or secret rocket debris, requires engineering and technical examination. "Vera," Streltsov called, "look at this." She read the entry and nodded. "Quadrant G4. That's about a kilometer from here, to the northeast." She checked the map. "Near a small lake." "That's where we'll head," Igor decided. "But first, let's check the rest of the camp. Maybe we'll find something else." They methodically examined all the tents but discovered nothing unusual. Everything indicated that the people had disappeared suddenly, possibly at night while everyone was sleeping. "Is the mental scanner ready?" asked Streltsov. Vera nodded and took out a device resembling a receiver with headphones. She put on the headphones, turned on the device, and slowly walked around the clearing, listening. "Anything?" the major asked curiously. "Faint voices," she answered, as if from far away, frightened, excited, but can't make out the words. She continued moving until she reached the northeastern edge of the clearing. Here she stopped. "It's stronger here," she said. "They went in this direction, and they were not alone." "What do you mean, not alone?" Streltsov tensed. "An alien presence." Vera removed the headphones. "Non-human, something that made them leave the camp in the night." They exchanged glances. Both understood what this meant. "Let's go to quadrant G4, Igor said decisively. "Major, are you with us, or will you stay here?" "With you, of course." Sokolov checked the pistol in his holster. "I want to see this object with my own eyes." They moved through the forest, navigating by compass and map. The snow was deep, their skis sank, but they stubbornly pushed forward. After half an hour, the trees opened up, and before them lay a small frozen forest lake. "It should be somewhere around here," said Vera, consulting the map. They slowly advanced along the lakeshore, carefully examining the area. Suddenly Streltsov noticed a strange glint among the snow and trees. "There," he pointed in the direction. "Something metallic." They approached and saw it. A strange object protruded from the snow, partially buried by blizzards. What was visible resembled a fragment of some enormous mechanism, a curved metal frame with plates of an unknown alloy attached to it. On the surface of the plates were engraved complex symbols, resembling hieroglyphics but unlike any known earthly writing. "What the hell is this?" the major exhaled. "It's not ours, and not American. It's like nothing I've ever seen." Vera took out the detector, which immediately went off the scale. The needle trembled in the red zone, and the device itself began to emit a low humming sound. "Extremely high supernatural activity," she said. "This object, it's from another world." "From Limbo?" asked Streltsov. No, she shook her head. From the abyss, from a place that not even beings like Merak and Zarya penetrate, from a place where the ancients dwell. They slowly approached the object. Up close it became visible that the symbols on its surface glowed faintly from within, with the same greenish light they had observed in the sky. Don't touch it, Vera warned. No direct contact. She took a camera from her backpack and began methodically photographing the object from all sides. Streltsov walked around its perimeter, carefully studying the construction. In size, the object was about 5 meters long and 3 wide, extending deep into the ground. It seemed this was merely the top of something much larger. What do you think it is? Igor asked, returning to Vera. A portal, she answered quietly. Or part of one. A gateway, partially open between our world and something else. And the missing platoon? Passed through these gates. Voluntarily or not, that's another question. Major Sokolov, who had been silently examining the object all this time, suddenly pointed to something in the snow next to the metal construction. Look, he said. There's something here. They approached closer. An army forage cap with a cockade and star lay in the snow. Next to it, a PM pistol in a standard holster. These are Karpov's things. The major picked up the cap. I recognized them. He was here. Streltsov carefully lifted the holster with the pistol. The weapon was in perfect condition, just very cold from the frost. Why did he abandon his weapon? Igor asked. An officer never parts with his pistol. Maybe he was forced to, Vera suggested. Or he no longer needed it. She put on the mental scanner headphones again and turned on the device. This time her reaction was instantaneous. She flinched and tore off the headphones as if she had heard something unbearable. What is it? Streltsov asked anxiously. They're here, Vera whispered, turning pale. Very close, but not on this side. They're waiting. As if confirming her words, the symbols on the object's surface suddenly glowed brighter. The light pulsated as if in rhythm with the beats of a gigantic heart. We need to return to base, Streltsov said decisively. Report to Derzhavin. This is too serious for just the two of us. I agree, Vera nodded. The technical department needs to study these photographs, and we need specialists on the ancients. We're not prepared for this level of threat. They were about to leave when Major Sokolov, still holding Karpov's forage cap in his hands, unexpectedly turned toward the object and took a step toward it. Major, Vera called out to him. Don't approach it. Sokolov didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the glowing symbols, as if he were reading an invisible message. Another step, and another. Stop him! Vera shouted. Streltsov rushed forward and grabbed the major by the shoulders, pulling him away from the object. He didn't resist, but he didn't react either, as if he had fallen into a trance. Major Sokolov! Igor shook him by the shoulders. Wake up! Slowly, as if waking from a deep sleep, the officer focused his gaze on Streltsov. What's happening? He mumbled. I saw them. They're calling. Who's calling? Igor asked tensely. I don't know. The major shook his head. Just voices, many voices. They promised. He fell silent, as if forgetting what he wanted to say. We're leaving. Vera grabbed Sokolov by the arm. Immediately. They quickly retreated from the object, returning along their tracks. But they hadn't gone 100 meters when a strange low hum sounded behind them. Turning around, they saw that the object's glow had intensified many times over, and the symbols on its surface were changing, rearranging, as if someone were trying different combinations. It's activated, Vera whispered. Run! They rushed through the forest, not following any path. The snow impeded their movement. Their skis caught on bushes and stumps, but fear drove them forward.